Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I drop my kid off at school and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, hello listeners. I hope that you're having a pleasant day. It is a beautiful day here in suburban Chicago. It's in the high 60s right now. It's supposed to get into the mid 70s. And I'm enjoying my walk home. I bought a muffin at the farmer's market, which I'll eat when I get home. Not going to eat it on mic because that would be rude. So there's been an interesting confluence of conversations online in the last couple days that I thought I would participate in and offer my thinking about it. In fact, I'm just sort of summarizing, actually, as I've thought about what I'm going to offer. I'm sort of summarizing what's been said in other places and offering some observations. So maybe this just is thinking through a question in a way that probably doesn't offer a ton of new insight, but hopefully organizes the idea in a useful way. So the two precipitating factors that lead me toward this conversation are both online conversations. One is a video and the other an accompanying forum posts, and the other is a forum conversation. So the video is the most recent Rodney Smith table talk video. So Rodney does these videos, this is his second one I think, where he chooses a complex or interesting problem to be talked about in the board game community. The first one was the question of hype, and he was talking about Wingspan, which I thought was a reasonable conversation to have. And this one he's talking about paid reviews. So in the video, Rodney outlines, first he defines his terms. He says he wants to sort of articulate that there are sort of three kinds of review type things that content creators, reviewers will do along with other kinds of content. So he talks about that there are reviews. This is where a reviewer looks at a game and they lay out the pieces and they talk about it and blah, blah, blah. Then there are previews, which is a well-disclosed paid explanation of the game by a game designer or a content creator, often someone who also does regular reviews. And then there are paid reviews, which is where the reviewer is actually paid by the publisher to do a review of the game. And Rodney, I think quite rightly, suggests that this is not a very common practice, although I will complicate the issue a little bit there. So that's one part of it. The second thing that inspired this discussion today is a thread on Board Game Geek where the subject line at the beginning was something along the lines of, do content creators deserve pity, quote unquote. And the person talked about how a content creator, a podcaster they listen to, the way this person articulated it, they gave half a review and then kind of said, I'll talk more about that on the Patreon channel, which would be for paid members only. Now, the person who originally posted that thread implied that the reviewer kind of did half a review and then left the listener in a cliffhanger and said, like, to hear the end of the review, you need to go to Patreon. However, they did not provide, the OP, the original poster, did not provide a link to the offending podcast, so we all had to kind of go on their word about what it was. So the conversation went off in a lot of different directions. And I participated heavily there. If you've been reading that conversation, I apologize. This might feel like a little bit of overlap. But I did want to think about this question of how do content creators get recompense for what they're doing. I guess as an aside, I should suggest two things. One, this is not a subtle preface to announcing a Patreon channel or anything like that. I'm not saying I would never do that, but the purpose and obligations I have to myself and to you, my listeners, does not put me in a place right now where I want to get paid to do this podcast. Not that there are enough of you that would even make sense, but I'm doing this for a variety of other reasons, mostly to talk to a community about things, and I enjoy it, rather than for specific recompense. That said, there are two other benefits. One, I think I gain in the gift economy doing this work. If you don't know what a gift economy is, I know I've done a podcast on it, so you can go look for that. I will try to I'll put a note about it in the show notes if I remember. But the long and short of it is, in a gift economy, like a free podcast market, you gain current status through reputation, through giving to the community, rather than through money, by being paid by the community. And so my participation with this podcast in the board game community builds my reputation, hopefully, rather than necessarily earning me money directly. And the third thing, I will be straight out. You hear at the end of each episode that little click sound, the rattling sound, and then the brought to you by Rattlebox Games. I make no secret that I am a game designer, and I'm working on designs with my design partner, Rob. You certainly will be subjected to a little bit of advertising for our Kickstarters whenever we launch those. That hasn't been a real big problem for you so far in the podcast, but I think that's a fair deal. Okay, so my cards are on the table. So starting with Rodney's conversation, I think these two conversations, one, reviewers getting paid, and two, should we pity content creators? I think they go together. Actually, there is a third piece. I'll link to it as well. A study, I just saw the reporting of it today, actually. A study was done about how people feel about people's jobs, and part of the discussion was, if people feel like someone is passionate about their job, then we are less likely to feel bad if they're exploited in doing it. I've certainly heard this conversation when they talk about people who make video games, and the working conditions for video game designers are terrible. But often when people say that, the next thing out of their mouth is, but then again, they get to make video games, so awesome. I don't know why I use that voice. That was my Bill and Ted voice, I guess. The underlying assumption is, if you're passionate about your job, that reward of enjoying your job should mean you get less money. But I don't really want to dive into that too much. So Rodney lays out that the problem that creates the issue of paid reviews is that reviewers are not very well paid otherwise. On one hand, there's unpaid reviews where people just do it because they want to. And this values the time and money spent. This is all Rodney's point, I'm paraphrasing. Values the time and money spent by the reviewer poorly. It says, we don't care about the effort they're putting in here, at least not enough to reward them financially. Which means they have to donate it all, which means they're probably going to get burned out at some point. Now, if it builds enough of a gift economy for them, perhaps they don't get burned out. But there is that problem. At the same time, the problem, I would say, like Rodney sort of says that paid previews are generally acknowledged as not a problem. That if they're well documented, if somebody says, this is a paid preview for this game, I'm going to show you how it works and do a little bit. Rodney says, however, sometimes reviewers, people who otherwise do reviews, will sometimes slip into giving their ideas or their feelings about the game, kind of reviewing it during the paid preview. And that can be confusing for viewers. I would also suggest that there's a subtler, though very easy to recognize, component of this in which a reviewer's reputation as a reviewer bleeds over into their work as a previewer. That when you have a previewer, and a previewer is never going to talk bad about a game, right? When you have a previewer talking about how a game works and what you do, they're never going to say, And then you put out 3 workers, and that stinks because you really need 6 to be successful, but for some reason they don't give you 6. They're never going to say that. They're just going to say, and then you put out 3 workers, and you can do the work. They'll read the script. But if we are used to hearing that person evaluate things and point out when things don't work, and then we see them give us the game and not say anything about how it's bad, it's easy to surmise that it's not bad. Even if rationally they're being paid to do this thing, it is very difficult to disconnect that. I would also say that while I think review copies are a necessary part of the hobby, I think that paid previews also complicate an reviewer's relationship to the company that makes that game. Who's ever going to go and review a game that they did a preview for and give it a bad review? I can't imagine people doing that. And if they do, I can't imagine the company hiring them to do another preview. So the unconscious or even a fully conscious bias built into the reviewer is there because they are driven by a market motive to evaluate games positively as soon as they start taking money from publishers. Inevitably. I'm not saying I at all judge reviewers who do that. I think it's probably a necessary thing if you want to be able to survive in the market right now, because we viewers have proven ourselves heavily unwilling to pay. That said, the Secret Cabal, the Dice Tower, and Shut Up and Sit Down all do, and Game Boy Geek, all do fairly elaborate fundraisers so that they can get money from their audience in order to do it. So that they're working for the audience rather than for the publishers. And I would say of the groups I mentioned, Shut Up and Sit Down is the best at keeping that separate, because as far as I know, maybe they've done 1 or 2 paid publicity events for projects that they really love, but it is not part of their standard process that they do advertising or they do any paid previews, that they are entirely audience funded, and as such, I think they, of the groups, have the least reliance on us. Secret Cabal has regular advertising from publishers. So does the Dice Tower. The Dice Tower does have a paid preview channel, although I'm not sure what the relationship between, say, Mark Streed's paid previews and the Dice Tower is. Like, does the Dice Tower get a cut of those paid previews? None of this, I want to be clear, none of this is me suggesting that any of these people are being unethical. I don't think any of these people are taking money to give good reviews. But there is an inherent corruption of your motives when money is involved in your being able to make a thing, right? If you only get money from your audience, then your audiences are the ones you're beholden to. I mean, if you review a bad game as though it's good, you're responsible to them. If you get paid by the publishers and you review a bad game as though it's good, if the publisher likes it and they pay you to do another one, some of your audience will probably be turned off by that. But ultimately, you don't get paid by your audience. And as long as you keep enough of your audience that the publishers still want you to do the thing, you can do that. And then, the third piece of that is this question of pity. So the conversation about pity comes from the idea that there was a reviewer who said, basically, I really would like to play some of these older games more, but I never get to because y'all don't vote for them. Actually, I'm confusing 2 different threads there. The one about the hidden Patreon content and the one about the I don't get to play old games anymore thing go together. But if you viewers would vote for playthrough of older games, we could play them. And this person kind of said, like, should we really have pity for this person? They're making their living doing game reviews. What do I care what they get to play, or why should I feel pity for them? First off, I quibble about the use of the word pity here. I'm not sure that that's what they were asking for. But it did lead to an interesting discussion in which we talked a bit about what obligation they have to the audience and whether we ought to support them or not. And if we do support them, should we then care how they enjoy, whether they enjoy their work or not? And all this goes to this question of, if somebody enjoys their work, do they deserve to get less money for it? And ultimately, how much am I willing to pay for my entertainment? I mean, we live in a buyer's market for entertainment right now. There's tons of entertainment, cheap or free, not only because of piracy, but just because there are so many amateurs. And I'm not saying people who aren't capable. I'm saying people who don't make their full living doing it, creating and distributing art, such that art is more and more a community experience, and a lot of us can get lots of art for very cheap. And as a result, individuals trying to make their living making art, it's harder and harder to do so. Although one could argue it's always been hard to do so. So this is a complex set of questions that we need to resolve, and I have run out of room for walking. I've actually walked past my house now. I'm going to turn around and go back in a minute. But I'm not sure what the big answer... I mean, to me, the big answer is obviously supporting artists in the way they want to be supported. I'm actually going to do another lap around the block. I have more to say. Buckle in, people. So for me, the beginning is support artists in the way they want to be supported. This is one of the lines Judge John Hodgman uses on that podcast of the same name, where he says that he suggests that when you see an artist asking for money, support them that way. If an artist publishes a book and you like that artist, buy the book. Don't pirate it. Right? If they do live shows, go to the live shows. If they sell merch at the live shows, buy the merch. If they do a podcast for free and once a year ask for money, and you like the work they're doing, support them by giving money when they ask. Cory Doctorow does this as well. He gives away digital versions of his books for free on his website. You're also able to buy ebook versions of his books from various places if you want, but you don't have to. He gives them away for free. And his argument still is that the greatest challenge facing an author is not piracy, it's obscurity. That there's so many things one might encounter that getting people to read your book at all is the crucial part. And some of them will buy the book then. For people who want to support him, they're like, hey, is there somewhere we can send you money? And he says, I find the services that my publisher provides extremely valuable. And I want to support them. I want you to support them as much as you're supporting me. So the best thing you can do is buy my book from a bookstore, a local bookstore. And then he's got this thing where, some people want to support him, they want to buy his book, but they don't actually want the book. They read the ebook, they don't want it anymore, but they want to support him. So then he set up this cool thing where librarians, people who work at libraries who would like a copy of one of his books, and this could be schools too, but don't have the funds for it, can sign up on this list. And then other people who want to buy a book for him can buy it from a local bookstore that ships and have it shipped to one of the people who has asked for the book for this other purpose. So, he's built this system by which he gets support and his systems that he wants to be supported. So the first thing I would say, if you're thinking about how do you support people who make things that you enjoy, is support them the way they've asked to be supported. Which goes to the tail end of one of these conversations in which I've been chatting with a game designer, and he said, I don't really understand this hobby. People will pay to support other people whose job it is to examine the art and, say, play it online or tell us about it, but we don't support the creators of the art in the same way. I've been kind of going back and forth with him about it a little bit, not because I disagree, I think I do. But he was saying, basically, I don't think people would support a Patreon for a game designer. And my take was, well, what would you get for being a Patreon of a game designer? And his argument is that this kind of support, the support I give to Shut Up and Sit Down, is payment to give them time to do the work they want to do. And I think that's true, but then I get the content that they make. And so the question for me to him was, well, how would I support a game designer in that way? In a way that I get the thing I want to, I get the game. And actually I offered a couple examples. Kickstarter is one, right? That Kickstarter is a way you support a game designer you like, and you get the game. Now it means they also have to do the work of making the game, or pay people to do that, but that is true of anything you do. And I think there are some commercial companies that have built this way. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that Splotter, the game company in Europe, most well known for things like Food Chain Magnate, and Roads and Boats, I think, is another of theirs. But Food Chain Magnate is the one that's sort of become most famous. The people who made that game, my understanding is what they do is they make a new game each year, and they make enough copies of it that if they sell out at Essen, they're set for the year in terms of their income. And then they do that every year. And there are people who really like their designs, and enough that they will go and just buy that thing. And this is a model that's been bandied around in the internet age for a decade or more. It's called something like the 1,000 dedicated fans, or maybe 10,000 dedicated fans. I think it's 1,000 dedicated fans. And the idea is, if a dedicated fan in this context is somebody who's willing to give 1 day's wage, whatever their day's wage is, to spend that on the thing the artist makes. It could be concerts, it could be albums, it could be games, whatever. But if you're willing to spend 1 day's wage on the thing the artist makes, then you should, and the artist has 1,000 true fans, if they can set up a system by which that happens, then they should be able to make a living doing that. So it's interesting to think about how we spend money on our hobby and how much we support different people that way. So obviously, as I said at the beginning, I'm not going to have any answers to this. But I am interested in having the conversation continue. So in the show notes for this episode, I will put links to these different conversations, and I will see whether we can figure out together how to solve this question or engage with this question in a way that's productive. So let me know if you have thoughts on that. You can do so over at Board Game Geek Guild 3269, where I will have a post about this show. Also, let us know what you've been playing lately. You can do that over at my Patreon. No, I'm joking. You can also do that at the Board Game Geek Guild. Or you can drop me an email, brendan@rattleboxgames.com. Thanks for taking the extra long time to listen to me today. I hope that it was worth it. And I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.